who's the person that's organizing the birthday parties or the baby showers or the carpools? Looking for that person who has those relationships in the workplace. You want someone who's well respected on the job because they won't be such an easy target for management.
All right, folks, you are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We have in studio with us Keith Brower-Brown from Labor Notes, Labor and Climate Organizer, and Courtney Smith, Staff Organizer for Labor Notes. Appreciate y'all taking the time to come do a couple of in-studio interviews with us. Really excited to have you down in Alabama. We wanted to do some of the some segments with some of the training that Labor Notes does to give you an idea of what you would experience at a Labor Notes, at a Labor Notes conference or a Troublemaker School or something like that. It's such a valuable resource, and really nothing is going to, listening to this or watching this is not going to be able to replace actually going in person, because a huge part of going in person is actually, and this is the dirty secret, not about the training, it's about the networking, right? It's about like meeting people and building relationships. That is a huge part of the training and the value that you get out of it. So you definitely, you should not, absolutely should not listen to this and say, okay, well now I never have to go to a beating apathy workshop, never have to go to building an organizing committee workshop from Labor Notes because I've already heard it, I've already got the value out of it. That is wrong. Do not want you to get that idea. You need to go in person with your coworkers and people in your area, because that is really a huge part of the value. And when you go in person, you're going to get different stories. You're going to get stories that Keith has never heard, that Courtney has never heard, that I have never heard, because there are stories that have never been told before that training that you're going to go to that day, right? So your no two trainings that Labor Notes does are going to be exactly the same, because a lot of the trainings are about learning with the audience and from the audience. And so definitely do not get the idea that like you've got the value out of this, but we want to do what we can and share this with as many people as possible, because it's such a valuable thing. And so this workshop that we wanted to talk through is they call it Assembling Your Dream Team, or Building an Organizing Committee. And so it's not just for like if you're in a new union campaign, obviously, you'll know that you need to build an organizing committee. But even if you are in a currently unionized workplace and you want to build the union into a more fighting union, a more democratic and militant union, you also need an organizing committee. You need a committee. And something that going to several of these trainings with Labor Notes has opened my eyes to a lot, with respect to organizing the workplace in a union sense, is that workplaces are already organized, actually. And so when a Labor Notes trainer says this, Courtney, when you're going to say tomorrow at the workshop, your workplace is already organized, what do you mean by that?
Well, the boss already brings us all together into one place and organizes us in a way that benefits the company. So what we usually do when we're doing this workshop online is I'll take a participant and ask them a series of questions about their workplace. How many different departments do you have? What are the different shifts? What are the different pay scales there? What's the invisible labor? Who can move around the workplace and reach the most people? So you'll find there's a lot of organization already happening that's being done by the boss, right? Which is why they have to actively, disorganize us, is what we talked about in the first session. So the other way that it's also organized is the workers, right? So there's social ways that we organize ourselves. So whether that's, all the smokers who go outside and smoke together, or the parents who get together with their kids after work and, hang out together, or any sports leagues that's happening, or carpools. Yeah, those sorts of social ways that we already kind of organize ourselves in automatically. We ask people to look at that, make a list. Actually, we have folks, if we do this training in person, sometimes we'll get the chance to have folks draw out a physical map of their workplace. and actually visualize how your work is organized. So yeah, there's a variety of ways that we're already organized and that we just have to kind of tap into that.
Right. And so that, making a physical map of your workplace, why is that helpful? Why is it helpful for me as an organizer to have a map like this for my workplace, Keith?
Helps you see who's connecting between different departments, who's connected in one department or part of the workplace. Who works together is who has to build some kind of relationship with each other. Sometimes that's a trusting relationship. Hopefully, a lot of the time it is. That we have to figure out how to trust each other and work with each other because we're taking care of each other, watching each other's back while we're on the job together. So this is a starting point for building an organizing team. You want to look at it, ideally to find some units that are already out there that are tight, where people trust each other, are ready to stand up for each other. But even if you can't find that, you'll find like, wait, if I'm cutting out the plasma intake department and I don't have anybody on my organizing committee from this big team, then I'm missing out on a huge chunk of the workplace, and the boss is going to use that to divide us.
Right.
So you need to be thinking with some of those things in mind as you're reviewing the map, but also as you are writing it out, be thinking about things like, where people congregate, or like who can walk freely through the whole workplace. Because in a lot of workplaces, you actually there are certain employees that part of their job is just to walk around all the time.
Maintenance,
yeah, like internal mail. Like we still have that at my workplace. I don't know how many people do that anymore, but we've got a guy that just walks around. And like that's it, he just puts mail on people's desks, and so like he would be super great to be part of the union and be like really all about it. You could have him send union messages all over the place, and just having that kind of physical representation of the workplace and some of those relationships is really beneficial. And so looking at this, what are some things that I should be noticing in this map as an employee of CSL Plasma?
Where's the supervisor? Where are they watching most often? That's important.
Right.
Do you have any space that's out of view of management? That's a good place to meet and talk to people. Maybe a starting point in this part of the hospital department.
Yeah, I see you've got the cameras are noted here, some of the cameras. And like you said, that intake, you might realize that I don't know anybody in intake. That's a whole huge department here. Courtney, is there anything else that I, as an organizing committee member, or as somebody who's trying to form an organizing committee, should be realizing about this map?
I think one thing that I was just thinking about was like intake here being right next to management. Usually, I'm sure intake, they have to sit still for the majority of their shift. And so making sure that you have a couple of strong people in your intake category here, because management is going to be so close in their ear, really trying to get people on board soon in this organizing process. It looks like the materials and processing here is kind of in a different area and cut off a little bit. So making sure that you're talking to those workers there, and then figuring out where are the places that is out of view of management, that you can have these conversations. Like we said earlier, identifying what are those positions that can move freely throughout the workplace, just kind of identifying who do you need to talk to where, and what are the conditions that they're experiencing, and things that you need to look out for.
And then if you're in an already unionized workplace, if you're able to get your hands on the member list, you can actually go through and say, okay, Jane sits here, June sits there, John sits here. And Jane, June, and John, they all sit next to each other in this 4-person kind of cube thing. And there's the 4th person over here, Billy. Billy's not a union member. The 3 of them, one of them should talk to Billy maybe.
Yep.
And you can do some cool color coding and things like that. And when you do that, you're almost certainly in a union workplace going to realize and be able to see like, oh, we're really strong in intake actually. Like if the union members are blue and the non-members are red, we've got 19 blue dots here. and only one red dot. We're really, really good there. But in materials processing or in donation, we're not so good. We're only like 50-50. So we need to really target donation or something like that. Those are things that can kind of come out of creating this map and using some of the other resources that you might have. And I mentioned having a member list, and something else that you should be creating as you are building your organizing committee and identifying who to target is a list. And you should have a separate list from your official union's member list with some other stuff in it than just, is this person a member or are they not? So as I am trying to build a list of all of my coworkers, what are some of the things that I should include in the list, like pieces of information in a spreadsheet or something, or maybe even just on a piece of paper?
Well, you definitely want to have your assessment of the person. Are they a supporter of the union? Going back to the bullseye example, would you consider them a part of the core, activist, supporter, or disengaged ring? And then that way you kind of know, what is the question, what is the level of ask that I can have here? So having that assessment is really important to really know what the strength of your union is. Another thing that's really important to include is, what is the issue that this person cares about? You know, if we're going to actually take on issues that our members care about, we have to document what those issues are and the things that they actually care about. That's two, I think, vital pieces of information that you would want to have on a list. Whatever other information that allows you to have a full kind of assessment of where people are. So maybe how long they've worked there.
What shift they work is important for when they can meet and who they work with.
Yep.
And maybe if there are any like relationships that stand out maybe as notable, you might want to make those, right? You know, so I mentioned
BFF with Kathy.
Exactly. Or like if we're going back to this 4-person kind of cube here, we've got June, Jane, and John, and Billy's a non-member. Well, what if for some reason the 3 of those people hate Billy and Billy hates the 3 of those people? Well, we probably don't want the 3 of those people to talk to Billy about joining the union, right? We want to get somebody that Billy doesn't already hate to talk to him. And so it's just another way to kind of understand your coworkers. And so we have, again, in this training, there's a sample list here that includes their name, obviously, the job that they do, the shift that they work, phone number, their email. And this has whether or not they wore a sticker, signed a petition, and attended a meeting. And so what are some things, once you've created this list, that you should be able to identify as an organizer looking at this list and trying to understand your workplace?
I think keeping track of these actions is a really rounded way of getting at the, like, what layer of the bullseye is somebody in? Are they a supporter, an activist, or disengaged? Like, you saw they were willing to take the risk of wearing a sticker in front of their manager saying they support the union. That's not nothing. But were they willing to sign a petition, like putting their name on a demand? That's maybe another level. Or were they willing to join a march on the boss or take time out of their evening to come to a union meeting? That's another level of commitment that it's showing. A lot of organizers talk about these as structure tests. You want to see how many people in your unit or in your workplace are willing to step up to these levels. But we want to keep track of it connected to specific people, not just as a number. Oh, we got 60 to do this. We want to keep track of specific people and think of them in this web of relationships in the organization of the workplace. Figure out, like, wait, intake is like not rising to this. So we need to figure out what will work for them. What are they willing to do? And maybe focus an action that's like working with where they're at.
I also noticed that everybody in the opening shift at least wore a sticker, but the majority of people in the closing shift did not wear a sticker. And so the closing shift, in addition to, like, we can also see that intake is kind of less involved and active than some of the other departments, but the closing shift is also less active than some of the other shifts. And so these are the types of things you will not know, or it is less likely that you will know if you don't write it down or if you don't record this somehow, because the knowledge of the workplace in a lot of situations comes out of doing this work, right?
Part of organizing is we learn through reflection, right? We take an action and then we come back together afterwards and say, well, how did we do? What was the results of that? How many people participated? If we notice that majority of people participated that worked on the open shift rather than the closing shift, then what is it that, the closing shift people care about? What got in their way of participating in this sort of action? So a lot of, kind of this list tracking is a way for us to identify those patterns and see what's working and what's not.
This workshop is geared around building an organizing committee. In this workshop, at least, all of this is all relevant in all facets of organizing, right? You're not only going to refer to your workplace map when you're building your organizing committee. You're also going to be able to refer to it when you're thinking of an issue to build a campaign around. You're going to be able to refer to it for grievance resolution, bargaining surveys, or any number of things. But this workshop is about building an organizing committee. Let's set these to the side for a moment and just think conceptually about an organizing committee. Keith, what are some of the kinds of people that we don't want?
We're going to talk trash now. Yes. A lot of us have a coworker who has a real skill at complaints, has a lot of gripes and is vocal about them. It can be tempting to think like this person, Steve, has a lot negative to say about the employer. That's a good start. That's some kind of fighting spirit if you're willing to be public with your gripes. But that's not necessarily the same as somebody who's willing to listen to their coworkers and bring people together and look out for them. That's not necessarily... Steve isn't necessarily somebody who's won the trust of their coworkers. So it's not a one-to-one thing. Just speaking up is not a guarantee that somebody is a builder of trust, is a listener, someone who others will follow. And we need leaders in our campaigns, not necessarily elected leaders, not talking about formal positions, but people who are already leaders in the workplace, who have some trust, who others will look to as like, well, if Patricia is willing to do this, she's been here a long time, she's looked out for me, she brought me water on the day or there's the heat wave, the boss needs her, and because she's so important here, if she's willing to take this risk, like I can take the risk too.
You didn't spend very much time on talking about the people that we don't want. You went really quickly. You went really quickly into the people that we do want. But that's okay. That's okay. There's a real stereotype about union people being kind of lazy or bad at their job or whatever, right? And that's obviously, we know that's not true, but also that is something that you want to take into consideration when you're building your organizing committee as well, because regardless of what people kind of propagandize about, nobody likes working with somebody who is just objectively bad at their job, right?
Makes your life harder.
Exactly. You're the one that has to pick up slack for this person. And so a person that is actually either objectively or is perceived to be bad at their job, this person is probably going to have a lot of their complaints about their employer as well. Probably not somebody that is going to be able to lead a supermajority organization. You have to have some amount of trust in your ability to actually be a kind of productive member of the workforce. And so that's somebody that you also don't want. But, enough of that. Courtney, what are some other characteristics that we should be thinking about as we're building an organizing committee? Who should we try to get on our organizing committee?
I think the simplest answer is a leader is somebody who has followers. So whoever's, who's the person that's organizing the birthday parties or the baby showers or the carpools, looking for that person who has those relationships in the workplace. You want someone who's well respected on the job because they won't be such an easy target for management. Surprisingly enough, we usually use talking heads for this one, and there's one talking head who is vying for a position with management and hasn't gotten it yet, and is pissed off about that. And usually most people are like, oh, I would not want her on the organizing committee because that would be, they're anti-union because they're wanting to get a management job. But really, the other side of that coin is that management also knows who our leaders are, and so they'll pluck them as well, right? So somebody who's going for a management position isn't necessarily, you shouldn't just write them off as, a person that wouldn't be good to be on the organizing committee, but, really see them as a potential, they have a potential grievance here against the company, right? So those are also seeing folks who do have those grievances, that are pissed off and maybe in the place of feeling like there's nothing that can be done about it. But yeah, having somebody who's like tired of the boss's shit is always a good, something to look for as well. So yeah, what have we got so far? Leader has followers, they're well respected on the job, they've been there for a while, they have relationships with people.
You want to get leaders, and that's what a leader is. And you also want to try to get leaders to the greatest extent that you can that are representative of the workforce too, right? Totally. Like, it would be difficult to lead an organization without anybody going back to our workplace here from intake, right? There's a lot of people in intake, and if your bargaining committee, your negotiating committee, your organizing committee doesn't have anybody from intake, it's going to be difficult for you to have that kind of perceived legitimacy, but also it's going to be difficult for you as an organizer to know what the people in intake need if you don't have anybody from there. Diversity in kind of all of the senses, right? You don't want an all-white, all-male organizing committee. You also don't want an all-opening shift organizing committee, even if you've got black, white, men, women, gay, straight, immigrant, non-immigrant, but they're all from opening shift. That's not a diverse organizing committee, actually. But the leaders are really the most important thing. And so it's important to think about who the leader is. And some other things that I've heard in Labor Notes workshops about how to identify leaders is like, think about your workplace. What if a problem happens? What if at CSL Plasma, the intake machine broke? Who do you call when the intake machine breaks? Or who do you call when you have a customer, somebody that you're interfacing with that is being belligerent? Who is the problem fixer? That's a good idea of who a leader is. Like you said, who is the one that organizes the happy hours or the birthday cards or the social events and things like that? They are probably leaders. Who does management look to? You know, you mentioned that people immediately kind of discount that person, especially like in labor notes trainings, but it is worth remembering that most people aren't as ideological about this as we are. They don't see being a manager as
the enemy.
Exactly. They just see this
Not
as
yet.
exactly right. We got to, if we get a leader who doesn't perceive it that way, we got to educate them. But a lot of people don't, and so we can't actually, because a lot of, like you said, a lot of people that are leaders are going to be targeted by management to be management. We can't just immediately cast them off because there's a reason that management is targeting them. I literally just had this happen to me in my workplace. There was somebody that was getting more active in the union, and I was like all excited about it, and then he goes and takes a management position. I still love you if you're listening to this program, but you hurt my feelings.
Just say on this point too is that the dominant ideology in America is that the way to improve your conditions is to work your way up the ladder.
Exactly.
So most people don't really see unions as a way for them to improve their conditions. It's all about being the boss, right? How many songs are there where we're talking about being a boss? Right? So I don't think we should count those folks out just because they're wanting to improve their conditions. I think that's a good sign that they want things to change. They just think that they need to do it on an individual level instead of collectively.
We've got to prove how that works.
Yeah.
We've got to experience that before it feels real.
Absolutely.
Right. We've got these qualities of what a leader is in our head, and then we're looking over our information, we're looking at the map, we're looking at our lists, and we're thinking through our notes from our organizing conversations that we've had. You need to definitely take notes when you're having organizing conversations. I've been in one training where they recommended like taking notes during the conversation. I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. I think that feels like kind of clinical. Like kind of clinical. You want to so you want to have just enough retention where like immediately you get back in the car and you shut the door and you make sure nobody's looking, and then you bring out the notepad. But you want to take some notes from these organizing conversations, and you're reviewing all of this information, and then you're like, okay, I think that Billy Joe is a leader. I reckon this guy, he's a leader. How do I test that? What do I, we've got a hypothesis now, Keith. What do I do to like see if that's true?
I think the first task of every organizer that you're trying to develop is like, can you talk to other people and like learn something from them? Like see if they're willing to go out and talk to a few coworkers and learn something, and maybe ask those coworkers to do something. So your first ask of somebody is to go and like do the work you're already doing of like having these one-on-one conversations. There may be people who aren't ready for that or like need an alternative, but I think that's really the one we should always be coming back to. That's like everybody's job in this organizing committee or dream team to be talking to our coworkers and bringing them into the action. We're not just like holding on to like the sacred organizing knowledge ourselves.
Right. What happens if you have a leader that you're not able to convince, that is hostile, maybe even belligerently hostile, but they do have followers? How do you organize around a leader?
Talking to an organizer at Amazon at the Bessemer plant when they were trying to organize that, he had shared how there was a leader, a white supremacist leader that was, anti-union and was, or doing his bidding, right? And I mean, I think the way around that is find out who has a relationship with this group or with someone else in this group and talk to them. Who is that next person that you can try and turn and build that relationship with? And it has to be genuine, I think. I mean,
Right.
I think, like I said earlier with the organizing conversation, people will feel it when you are coming to them with an ask that's not what they want to do. So I think sometimes you have to be patient and you have to wait. The boss is a really great organizer as well. He'll do a lot of good job in pissing people off. So you kind of have to wait for that moment where the boss will do his thing with pissing this group of people off, and you can find your opening.
Exactly. There are a few things that I've heard in these workshops, and there's one in one of Jane McAlevy's books that's really inspiring, and that, like, I may have almost inadvertently tricked you, because one of the ways is that you don't ever actually count them out. You do organize around them, and you try to talk to the people that they lead. And sometimes there are multiple leaders of the same people, and they lead for different reasons. And so maybe if you've got this anti-hostile leader over here, maybe you have a less hostile or a pro-union leader over here that the same people are looking to, and so you target the other person. But sometimes you do have to kind of do the work of organizing under them, and that's going to be much harder than the leader bringing these people along. You're basically having to kind of snipe their followers, right? But also, there are opportunities to even flip hostile leaders. And so in one of Jane McAlevy's books, they're organizing a hospital. There's this, I mean, like really, really belligerently anti-union campaigning, like printing off her own signs and stuff like that. Like, and she wins her department. I mean, almost unanimous against the union, but they win the election. And so what the union did in that situation was they went back to this leader and they say, look, we won the election. You're going to be working under a contract that we negotiate. Don't you want to be part of making that happen? And so they recruited this really belligerently anti-union leader to be on the negotiating committee. And through struggle, like we talked about with the packing house workers and in Cleveland and these other stories, this person was transformed into one of the most pro-union advocates. She quotes from some of her Facebook posts, like before the election and then after they got the contract. And, you know, this person called Jane like crying about like how great the contract was and how much the union is such an important, you know, and it's, so there are opportunities, and sometimes you have to wait for them. But you can't ever totally count somebody out, especially like if they are a leader. You do have to be willing, even if they say like really mean things to you, be willing to open the door again.
And I think the another point here too is like they may be anti-union, but that doesn't mean they're anti-Courtney, right? So I could develop a relationship with them and kind of keep that door open and build rapport so that eventually when the opportunity does arise, we can return back to, hey, remember that conversation we had about the union? This is why it's important, you know?
Exactly.
I feel like one of the most common versions of this that comes up is not somebody who's hostile to the union, but a union officer who doesn't want direct collective action. And a big purpose of Labor Notes is to support rank and file union members trying to build reform caucuses when their officers are not supportive of this sort of direct conflict with management. Thinking of an example in the electrical workers, IBEW, someone we know and love who worked with us for a brief time in Seattle, an electrical worker, had a lot of battles with management and with local officers before, built a reform caucus that fizzled out. But through that had like earned some trust and respect from a lot of workers.
Right.
And then there's a really bad wildfire up in the Northwest that was just pummeling this Microsoft huge job site, construction site with smoke. Jorge had like built up enough trust that even though officers didn't want to call off the workday, he called the hall. They were, you know, saying like, you got to wait. Sure, it's dangerous smoke, but we're going to wait. Jorge had built up enough trust of his coworkers to take direct action, essentially, to organize around by like building respect over the years and by like on that morning, talking to a ton of folks on the job site, getting them together.
Right. Now you know how to build an organizing committee, find leaders, make the organizing committee representative. Like I said earlier, a big part of this training over the whole day is the exercise on organizing conversations. And so next time y'all or somebody else from Labor Notes is down in Alabama, we'll try to get y'all in the studio to talk about that.